Almost. Yeah, plug. Okay, I hope, uh-oh, what happened? Wait a minute, sorry, something happened here. Can you all see it? Now you can plug.
Yes.
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to acknowledge the bad news just because I'm not going to talk about it. I feel like I should at least mention it. And then um, China, I'll have something to say about that. But in Ukraine, there's a new book out. It's written by a guy named Simon Schuster, who is Russian and Ukrainian somehow. So this is kind of the inside story of Zelensky. It's got good reviews. I started it. I spent a lot of time on China last year, and this is just an update. We've read about the problems they're having, and the problem with being a top-down society, and all of a sudden consumer confidence is plunging, and they just don't know what to do about it. And there's a drop in private investment because the Communist Party has been so heavy-handed. So there's that. And then a few articles I've run across about liberalism is far from dead in China. So I've got my eye on that. We might have a session on that at some point. So domestic agenda. What we're going to do today is I just want to finish up the historic ramifications of the conventions, a little bit about the pre-debate hype, and continuing in the theme of California's outsized influence in national politics with Nancy Pelosi at the center. And then we are going to try to extricate Junipero Serra from San Diego. And I think I want to finish his story by September 24th. That'll be the last session for a month. And we're going to go to Italy with David Pepper and Christine, his wife. So we'll take an autumn break in the month of October. All right. So off we go. I ran across this domestic, a one-on-one an hour interview with Trump. Julia's husband, Bill, told me about this guy, and I've been following. He does in-depth interviews, sometimes lasting 2 to 3 hours, and very interesting. I thought Trump in this session, there was no surprises, except he did kind of stay on message. So I don't know what that means for tonight. I just wanted to make the point that he was only able to take over the Republican Party because of the new primary system that came in the 1970s. We talked a little bit about that. It came really in the wake of the chaotic Democratic convention in Chicago. But it just gave the true believers in each party more power because they're the only ones that vote in the primary system. And that's what's fed into our polarized system. It was interesting. Lex was trying to get Kamala to come and sit down with him for a couple of hours. I don't know if she'll submit to that. Anyway, he also helpfully includes an outline of the topics that he covers with his subjects, and this is what he covered with Trump. Helpfully, if you're interested in one thing, you could fast forward to it. And then getting back to San Francisco, this is Nancy Pelosi's new book. A friend of mine is almost done with it and says it's great. This comes on the heels of a book last year by somebody else, a biography. This is an autobiography. So, and just to get back and finish up her interview with Ezra Klein, you'll remember Ezra's got a good feel for the Bay Area. He grew up in Irvine, but he went to school in Santa Cruz. Didn't do well, but boy, did he have a late blooming career in journalism, all the way to the New York Times. And then he was here until just last year and moved back to New York. But he made the point that from his point of view, it seems like San Francisco politicians have an outsized power nationally, and he thinks that San Francisco politics is so rough and tumble that you have to learn how to throw a punch and take a punch. Homer lives over there among all the excitement. But here we have him talking to Pelosi, who's probably the most successful Bay Area politician in a long, long time. But if Kamala wins, there'll be plaques popping up all over Oakland. Kamala drank coffee here. And then Gavin Newsom, he challenged DeSantis to a debate. He's not afraid to play in the national scene. And I remember when he was mayor of San Francisco, how hard he worked to try to take care of the homeless problem. And boy, oh boy, he threw everything he had at it, and it's just proved to be insoluble. And now he's tackling it as governor. Ro Khanna he's actually from the peninsula, but he's a comer on the national scene. And this Scott Wiener, who worked his way up grassroots from the San Francisco City Council, and now he's a big player up in Sacramento. Pelosi adds to that list Leo McCarthy, who was a player in Sacramento, but nobody was ever a bigger player than Willie Brown, who just an amazing story. Came here to San Francisco as a poor boy from Texas, and just by dint of personality and charisma, became the most powerful politician in Sacramento. Of course, George Moscone, who was assassinated when he was a mayor. And of course, Dianne Feinstein, who filled in as mayor and then went on to become senators. A while back, there were the Burton brothers, Phil and John, who were big powers in Washington, D.C. So go figure. And the question is why? And this is Nancy Pelosi's answer. It's such a diverse place. San Francisco historically, and when we get back to the history of California, you'll see at each phase, each era of the California history, San Francisco is always open, welcoming, tolerating dissent, even to the detriment of a smooth running society. It's chaotic often over there. Um, but she points out the Castro as the latest example of San Francisco tolerance. Certainly, a woman's right to choose. Basically, any subject, there's always a affinity group that's advocating for it, and it's beautifully, beautifully diverse with every religion or none at all, every kind of political thought, a lot of activity saving the planet, especially with the .com people. That's one of their favorite projects. But she points out, and you can't deny it, there's a lot of need, a lot of need, particularly in Hunter's Point. Um, so, but she says at the background, there's a lot of sophisticated thinking about how to get things done, strategic, the intellectual resources of Stanford and Berkeley, University of San Francisco, Rudy's alma mater, Jesuit trained. And so there's that. But she says it's not easy. It's very competitive. And there is a network of allegiances and loyalties. And that was Kamala's first big challenge, how to get through and break into that network. Now, she had an affair with Willie Brown, which didn't hurt. But 10 years later, she ran against her boss in the district attorney's office, and that was K.O. Hallinan. And we talked briefly about that before. And Pelosi says that somebody needs to mute. Pelosi said that she was actually an ally of the Hallinan family when Kamala broke in. If you want to read about the Hallinan machine in San Francisco, this book, Season of the Witch, really starts in 1950 and gives the last 50 years of up to the 21st century in San Francisco. And when you think about it, you have the 60s, the Haight-Ashbury, you have, unfortunately, drugs. Unfortunately, you have Jim Jones and Jonestown, that whole thing. Yeah, you have the assassinations of Moscone and Milk, some of that spinning off because of the forward-looking intolerance of San Francisco for the gay community. And you have Dianne Feinstein filling in. But I won't tell you what saves San Francisco in the end and helps put it back together, in case you want to read it. But it's a good read, warts and all. And it starts with the Hallinan family. This just appeared this weekend. This look back to Harris's combative debate style, and it starts with her debate against Terrence Hallinan. Yes, Homer.
Well, you're mentioning the Hallinans. It takes us back to your introduction about San Francisco as being a tough, bare-knuckled town. The Hallinans actually boxed. So their hands, there wasn't quite bare knuckled, but they fought with their fists, literally. Maybe sometimes without gloves on. There really was. Your metaphor was real in the Hallinans.
Yeah, K.O. Hallinan.
That's why he was called it Knockout Hallinan. That's right.
Terrence Hallinan. So she debates him. And this article goes into detail. I tried to cover this, but this gives a little more detail. And I just want to go through that. This is what was mentioned in the article. Her dating Willie Brown was bought up in the debate, but she was ready. She was debating not just Terrence Hallinan, but a guy named Bill Fazio. And so after this innuendo popped up, she walked over behind Fazio and asked the audience if they remembered how Hallinan had attacked him for being caught in a massage parlor in a raid. Then she walked behind Hallinan and asked the audience if they remember how Fazio had attacked him for being a deadbeat dad who failed to pay child support. And then she said, "If I'm elected, I pledge that unlike my opponents, I'll run a campaign based on the issues, not on negative attacks." And the audience jumped to their feet. So it was the way she did it. She got a standing ovation. She knows how to work a crowd. And maybe it comes from persuading juries. She tends to thrive in the adversarial setting. So if she goes one-on-one in a TV interview, that's missing. She actually does better when she has an enemy than she could focus on, just like she did in the courtroom. And tonight, she'll have that enemy. In 2010, she moved up and she knocked off the incumbent attorney general. And here she is in debate with him. Her basic argument was that she would be tougher and more effective. Running as a Democrat, that's saying something, right? Eventually, she only won by a very small amount after a recount. But the turning point in the debate came up when her opponent was accused of double dipping. So what's that? That is, you're a public employee and you retire from one job and you take your retirement, but then you get another public job and you take the salary. So now you're getting two paychecks. And he was asked about that in the debate, and Kamala shone a spotlight on that. She said, "Go for it, Steve. You've earned it," because he had said something like, "Well, I earned it. I'm going to take it." And with subtle sarcasm, she agreed with him. "Yeah, you've earned it." And the moderator later said that she was incredibly quick on her feet in that debate. But it was also a bit of luck. And I just, the word luck rings a bell to me. It's something Timothy Snyder said about history. He says we spend a lot of time analyzing the facts and the movements of history, but a lot of time it's just random luck and the contingencies of history. And I think in our own personal histories, the contingencies of life, and what if we hadn't met our mate when we did, how different our life would be. So luck. So 2016, she runs for the Senate, and she runs against Loretta Sanchez from Orange County. And at the time in football, there was a triumphalistic taunt that looked something like this. It's called dabbing. I never understood it. But Loretta Sanchez tried to be flashy with this football taunt.
John, that's the posture of the Heisman Trophy, the statue.
Oh,
The head is up; it's not down on the trophy, but the arms are in that position.
Oh, okay. Now I finally understand after all these years. I'm glad I come to these sessions. And so how did Kamala respond? With restraint, timing, and humor. And she connected, and her advisor from the time commenting on this, her response said, "No one is better at reading not just the room, but personalities and motivations and potential weakness." And she raised her eyebrows, and then she said, "Well, there's a clear difference between the candidates in this race." And with her characteristic laugh with the audience, clearly she was laughing at her, and it tended to point out that Sanchez was not serious, and that she was. And she knows how to be logical because she has to be with a judge and jury. She has to be on her toes and serious. She wound up winning by 23 percentage points. And of course, with regards to tonight, she has described Trump as unserious. But he could be have extremely serious consequences if he wins again. Then she debated Biden, and you'll remember that debate. She was on her back foot because prosecutors in 2020 were in retreat. That was the era of maybe the dumbest slogan that the left ever came up with, which was defund the police. That might have cost us what was supposed to be the blue wave. And we just barely won by a squeaker. So she was, as a prosecutor, looking for another angle. And she thought she had it with busing because you'll remember when we were doing her biography, she was bused in Berkeley in the beginning in the second grade. She was in the first class that was bused in Berkeley. And since Berkeley was the first place for busing in the Bay Area, she was in the first group of kids that were bused. But she had been branded as Kamala the cop, and she wasn't. She likes to run as prosecutor, but she couldn't. And I thought she was grasping at straws with this because Biden had talked about how he could compromise and work across the aisle even with segregationists. And she was responding to that. Tulsi Gabbard, we've been to Hawaii. We know a political consultant in Hawaii, and he says and Tulsi Gabbard's kind of nuts, but she ran as a Democrat, and Kamala took her down, just pointing out she was ready to counterattack Gabbard when Gabbard attacked her. And she pointed out that Gabbard had been on Fox News and snoozed up with Trump and even Steve Bannon. And that was that. And Tulsi Gabbard never ran as a Democrat after that. And so Biden appoints her as vice president, and she has to debate Pence. And which reminds me, we'll be seeing a debate between Waltz and J.D. Vance, and that'll be a good debate. But Pence came out aggressive, not a polite Hoosier like me, but very aggressive, like Trump had schooled him. And when he started bulldozing, she went into prosecutor mode. and I'm speaking, Mr. Vice President. She called him Mr. Vice President, but nevertheless chastised him. And the moderator later said she was more successful than I was in enforcing the rule. The moderator said that Kamala was very disciplined, and it was hard to pin her down. Even when she was dodging the moderator's questions, she did it skillfully. And Kamala is very expressive. I think I might have mentioned. I heard the first half of her acceptance speech in the car without seeing her face, and then I sat down to watch the second half, and it was like I was watching a different person. She's very, very emotive with her face, and I think you can see it here. So expect that tonight. She won that debate. And Pelosi says of Harris, you don't realize her adroitness. She comes across so pleasantly with her laugh and smiling. But she got to be district attorney. She got to be attorney general and senator and vice president, now a presidential candidate. And Pelosi said in the day after Biden dropped out that Kamala was fairly ruthless and moving fast. I think we were all surprised at how quickly the field cleared. But she was making phone calls, and her brother-in-law was making some of those phone calls too, and locked it down. Are you with me or not? Very quickly. So she didn't get to be where she is by being laughing all the time, and I think she'll be pretty steely tonight. Anyway, I was encouraged by going through her past debates, and I'm less worried about tonight. We'll see. Ezra did an analysis of her convention speech, which he said was very revealing about what her clues and what her mindset is as we go into the campaign. So I'm just going to go through his analysis. He said that her immigrant stories really landed. The story of her mother and father, we've talked about them, and the work ethic of her mother, and her mother's intolerance for complaining or whining, and her mother's fight for women's health, which is an issue in this campaign. And then she threw in that her mother was tough, never do anything half-assed. And she used the word half-assed very self-consciously, but she did use it. In her speech, Ezra said it was almost like it was reverse engineered to win over conservatives, because it was a conservative speech. And she pointed out the bipartisan border bill, because she's weak on border, right? But the bipartisan border bill that her friend and close colleague, they work closely together on a couple of committees. James Langford, we talked about his work on the immigrant bill. And that she said she'd be signing it. And she said, I refuse to play politics. I'll bring back that bill that Trump killed. And he did kill it. And we talked about at the time that is a potential attack on him, how he wanted to have it. And he was quite honest. I want to have it to run on against Biden. Well, we'll see. We'll see how that works out. Even though she has a great immigrant story within her own family, she's actually by supporting this bill is tightening the border. Um, okay. So she talked in her speech about living in a beautiful working class neighborhood, but she's, as a prosecutor, is always looking for the security and safety of these working class people. And it was interesting. She named by name a friend named Wanda, who was sexually abused by her stepfather, and who she invited to come and live with her family. And she just said, "I became a prosecutor to protect people like Wanda." Um, so Ezra pointed out, now, as opposed to 4 years ago, she is free to be the law and order person that she always saw herself as in politics. It's an asset now, and she can act naturally and follow that star that was rising in the early part of her career when she could identify as a prosecutor. And he contrasts her with Obama. There's a lot of people that are comparing her to Obama. He said Obama, he was for confronting power, but Kamala, and I think this is important, she wants to become power. She wanted to become a prosecutor from within the system and fill out that role with compassion. She thought she could do more that way than confronting power. Um, so I thought that was an interesting analysis. Regarding California and Reagan-esque sunniness, Ezra points out there's something different going on now. And that is, yes, in my backyard. Yes, in my backyard. That's what has to be done to attack the housing problem. And we've seen that in Lafayette big time play out, that housing development across from Akalani's high school, and how No in my backyard has stopped that repeatedly. And she gets a huge applause for tackling these problems, as does London Breed, the San Francisco mayor. When Ezra came back and lived in California, he really focused his New York Times podcast on California issues. And I remember he had one episode with Scott Wiener, and this is how he promoted it. Pay attention to what's happening in California. That they're trying new things, and this is Scott Wiener, and I've talked about him in the past. His story is very interesting. How he launched his career running against an Asian in an Asian district, kind of a unique accomplishment. And he and London Breed are trying new things and be the new kind of Democrat, as is our friend Gavin Newsom. And he certainly gives lip service to liberal causes. When he was mayor, he opened the door, was the first one to open it for gay marriages. And then he was challenged and had to stop, but it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and he won, as we well know. But he was at the cutting edge of that. But he's quite aware of anger against crime, and he's working on that. So he's trying to work both sides. We'll see how that goes. But I think I mentioned before that he and Kamala have kind of an agreement. Kamala would do the Senate, and he would do the governor. and it's working out in a very interesting way. In terms of foreign policy, Ezra pointed out that she is advancing Trump's ambition for power as her major point when it comes to foreign policy. And she says Trump is easily flattered. Boy, oh boy, is that true. And he wants to be an autocrat himself. I think we think there's plenty of evidence for that. But she wants to stand against autocrats, and she's been very strong in her support of Ukraine. And he thought she looked strong. And that's the point I was trying to make. When I finally got home and turned on the TV, I was really impressed at how steely she presented herself. She's trying to move to the center, a classic strategy to make the Democratic Party a safe home for people that are uncomfortable with Trump. Like Obama, she doesn't have to talk about race because just being who she is speaks for itself. So she can use all her bandwidth for other issues. And she certainly is not pandering to the left. And when she was heckled by the Gaza crowd, she said, "Oh, so you want Hamas here? You want to live under Hamas?" She was ready for him. It was interesting what the dog that didn't bark. She didn't say anything about climate change, which ordinarily for a Democrat, yeah, you've got to mention. But it's like she's got a contract with us liberals. I say us. I mean some of us here are not maybe as liberal as we are, but some are. And he said there's an implicit contract. Just let her appeal to the center now, and then we'll do this thing when we govern together later. And we'll see how that works out. He thought that this is about her ability to project emotion. He thought when she talked about the tragedy of Gaza, you could feel it. Not so much with Biden. Maybe they said much the same thing, but you could see her words here. She talked about the suffering, and it's heartbreaking, and you could feel it when she said it. And this is a master politician, I think. What she's trying to do, go into the center, is kind of what Biden did. And so really the torch is being passed to a centrism, and that she's the natural inheritor of that. I think the Republicans are going to try to take some of the positions she took in 2020 when she wasn't running as a prosecutor. They're going to take some of her statements and misstatements on healthcare, where she was all over the place. It was very disappointing. But they're going to try to twist it, so we're going to see a lot of that. But she is running to the center. The other thing that Ezra thought was that would appeal to the electorate is the way families were presented at the convention. In particular, men's roles. Tim Walz being her vice president, but her husband, who gave a great speech and talked about how much fun it is to live with her. And then, of course, with the Waltz family, you had demonstrations of love within that family with the handicapped son. I don't know if handicap's the right word. Challenged. What's the right word? Anyway, he contrasted the two conventions. The Republicans ran like they'd already won, and the Democrats are running like they want to win. So I like that. And of course, having Republicans on board talking about the Republican Party, Adam Kinzinger, how it suffocated his soul. He voted to impeach. He participated in the panel investigating January 6th. And of course, Cheney has endorsed Harris now. Some of Trump's advisors have denounced Trump as unfit, but they haven't taken the step of endorsing Kamala. But David French has, and I've been following him for a long time. He's a conservative columnist, but I followed him because he's a never Trumper, and he's very much pro-Ukraine. He was interesting guy, born again Christian, who went to Ivy League law school and then went into the military. So he's got an interesting background, and he's endorsing Harris. And he points out that all the former staffers are endorsing Harris, along with prominent Republicans like Bill Kristol. And Pence has declined to endorse him, Trump, but hasn't taken the step of endorsing Harris. And French, who now writes this weekly column for the New York Times, says 9% of voters are at least considering switching to Trump. 9% of Republican voters. So we'll see. And then John Kelly, who was chief of staff, you'll remember him. He just says Trump admires autocrats and murderous dictators and has contempt for our democratic institution. Doesn't get any stronger than that. David French, by the way, says that the Ukraine war, 100 years from now, historians will call that this event that's happening right under our noses the last couple of years as the biggest event of the first 25 years of this century. Okay, so any before I turn to Junipero Serra, are there any comments, questions?
You gave me confidence, John, on the speech tonight. So.
We have confidence flowing here in the projection room.
But we have to be careful not to underestimate Trump. Always, he's really very effective on television. It's the medium he knows. And I read one thing I thought was just a great suggestion, is that Kamala should point out that Trump always says he wants to testify, but never does, because he can lie on his ads, he can lie in his political comments, but he can't lie in court because you're under oath and you'll get caught. And he can lie here at tonight's debate, and she's going to tell the truth. But Trump is very good on television. He beyond his rambling speech, it's his physical presence. Remember when he strode over and stood behind Hillary?
Yeah.
So yeah. I've read some columnists who are a little worried about it still. So.
Well, I was worried until I started reviewing the old debates.
Yeah, it's very reassuring what you told us.
I think she'll be ready for a stunt like that. Yeah. Okay.
You just reminded me in saying that, and you're right about Trump. It's very much a David and Goliath battle tonight. We'll see how the slingshot works out.
Yeah.
Well, you've read you've read Michael Lewis on David and Goliath, have you? That really a guy with a sling was an impossible opponent for a huge giant. That David really had the advantage. That's what Michael Lewis writes. You can throw many deadly projectiles from a distance long before the giant can get near you.
That's a good point. That's a good point. All right. Are we ready to move on to Junipero Serra?
Sure.
Okay. 8 minutes to at least get started.
Okay, all right.
So let's I at least want to review a little bit. He's so important because he's embedded in our California culture. You see here, he's called the founding father, the founding father, not one among many, but the. He certainly was embedded in our children's school lessons at the fourth grade. They built a model of a mission, and he's been kind of celebrated without much critical thinking. And in 1931, California chose Serra to be the California statue. You're allowed 2 statues, and a former Stanford dean, oh come on, what's his name? Was one, but he was eventually bumped by Ronald Reagan. So
David Starr, you've been thinking of David Starr Jordan?
Yes, exactly. So Ronald Reagan bumped David Starr Jordan. And so now our California statues are Reagan and Serra still. And so this was becoming an issue, especially with the process started of him becoming a saint. He was beatified in the 80s by Pope John Paul. And so this is a long process, which finally reached its culmination in 2015. John Boehner was so tired of being Speaker of the House for these unwieldy Republicans that his retirement strategy was to invite the Pope, and John Boehner is a Catholic, and that would be his signal to retire, which he did, and so Pope Francis visited this statue. And I just invite you to look at other people that are there in the audience. I'll come back to a different photo in just a second. But on the other hand, you had a lot of disapproval of Serra, and we've certainly seen a lot of statues attacked. Not so much in California until now, this episode, but in the South, the statues for the Civil War heroes. But with the beatification of Serra, it started up. I don't know how many of you have seen this statue of Serra on Highway 280. It's at a rest stop in Hillsborough, and it got attacked. Hardly an attack, just a #1 glove put on his finger. I like the critique of the sculpture work here. It looked like it's mashed potatoes.
You know, John, I think it was Herb Cain who started referring to it as Dopey's grave. It kind of caught on.
I didn't know. Oh, yeah. That's good. That's rich. Okay, back to here's Nancy Pelosi. She's Catholic. And when Sarah's statue in Golden Gate Park was attacked, the right wing attacked Pelosi for not protecting the statue. So McCarthy, who's also Catholic, and was a speaker until he got booted out. He didn't get to go as gracefully as John Boehner. When he was speaker, he called on Pelosi to condemn the mob violence in Golden Gate Park. I'm not sure where the statue was. You know, Homer?
No, I don't, John.
I'll research that. Anyway, there's a whole academic field that's been critical of the Spanish encroachment into California, using the mission system in particular as a way of setting up settlements. We'll get to it, but the motivation to move into Upper California wasn't to save souls primarily. It was to counteract the Russians who were coming down from Alaska. And we'll get to that. But in the process, the missionaries converted in a mandatory way. They abused converts, and they could justify anything that they were doing in that they were saving souls. Unbaptized infants were going to go to hell. Actually, St. Augustine didn't think they would go to hell. They just wouldn't get a reward. In particular, the Franciscans, and we'll learn, they were not of the Enlightenment. The Jesuits were. They worked inside the Enlightenment and tried to work inside the cultures. I don't know if Rudy got any of this propaganda in his education, but they were tolerant. But the Franciscans, not so much, even though the spirit of St. Francis, you thought they would be. But by the time Sarah became a Franciscan, they were very much a part of the very conservative Inquisition that had taken over the Catholic Church. Unwittingly, by congregating Indians, Native Americans, they exposed them to the communicable diseases, and they didn't know, but they were spreading smallpox, they were spreading TB by moving Native Americans into mission communities, mission dormitories, where they were separated by sex because of the very prudery, a big prudery on the part of the missionaries. And we know that our local Miwoks resisted. Connie Loosely has told us about that. And Sarah used corporal punishment. But here's the thing. A lot of people use corporal punishment in Europe. And it wasn't unusual at all for parents to spank their children. Within the British Navy, floggings were acceptable. If you've ever read 2 years before the mast, that was a central theme in that book by Richard Dana. And so here's the thing, though. From the point of view of Native Americans, they did not use corporal punishment. They didn't spank their kids. No way. So this was unusual from their point of view to be treated that way. On the positive side, the missionaries did try to teach Native Americans not just school, but farming techniques. And they were there with Spanish soldiers who were terrible with Native American women. It was a scandal. And in fact, Serra had to move the missions a number of times just to get away from the Presidio where the soldiers were, just to keep a distance between his own soldiers and the Native American women. And so some people defended him, as this guy does, for doing that. Francis's argument, and he heard out the criticisms, was that the Spanish had offered citizenship and education, and if they Native Americans would just convert and learn how to farm. And the promise was at the time that after 30 years, the mission land would be turned over to the Native Americans. So in that context, if that were done, we might be talking about it very differently. But obviously, it was not done, and the land was distributed. It wasn't. It was in after the Mexican independence, where these missions were Mexican, that the land was distributed to Mexicans, not to Native Americans. And so here you have the major players of the big event, where Serra was made a saint in Washington, D.C. on this visit with these three with these three Catholics in attendance, two of them being Californians. Kevin McCarthy's from Bakersfield. All right, so that's a good place to stop. When we start next time, I just wanted to give you why I'm going to talk about Serra and what the stakes were in both sides, the pro and the con. And next week we'll start to see why he became the way he did, why he practiced self-flagellation. But I'm going to show you that that was not necessarily an outlier thing to do at the time. And so we have to, at least with one eye, judge him in the context of his time. And I'll try to bring that time alive next week. We'll start with him being born in Mallorca, of all places, out in the middle of the Mediterranean, and how much a role that played in his development. Okay, questions, comments?
So, John, what was the name of the Jesuit founding father in Baja California and Arizona?
Kino. Kino.
Father Kino. And it'd be interesting to compare and contrast their approaches to native peoples.
Yeah, we did
did
that
a little.
maybe before you joined.
I
You
think
know,
I heard it, and I kind of want to be, I guess, reminded. Maybe I should look it up. Father Kino, is his statue in the Arizona pair in the California?
yes it is. Very good. You do remember that. Yeah.
And but he was never canonized.
No, no. But I think there's some movement on the part of the Arizona clergy now that if Sarah can do it, and Aquino, in contrast to Sarah, was Jesuit
Yeah,
and was a man of the Enlightenment. And it wasn't that he was so much successful in Baja, he was successful on the mainland. And so Sonora and heading north, that's why he spilled over and could spill over into Arizona. His influence was on the mainland. But he was quite an interesting character, Germanic, I think, and I think from the Tyrol. But yeah, we'll touch on him. I have put together an index of our previous sessions. There were 7 of them where we dealt with Sarah, either in total or at least in the part of the session. And I can distribute that list with the links. So if you want, you can, and I'll try to put the exact times in the session where we talked about Sarah.
that'd be good.
I have a quick question, John.
Julia here in studio.
Recently I went to some, I think 4 to 5 missions in San Antonio, Texas. And they look a lot like the missions here in California, but I didn't know if those were Franciscan or if they were Jesuit.
So it's good that you bring that up. Both were interested in Texas. In fact, Sarah was assigned to go to Texas 9 years before he got to California, but his mission was called off, and he wound up staying in Mexico City working for the Inquisition. So history would have been a lot different if he had actually gone to Texas. We're going to hear about Mary Agreda, who was one of the influences on Sarah. She was a nun, and she never left her convent, but she told her confessor of dreams that she had, that she bilocated, is the word they used. She time traveled to Texas and converted Native Americans. I'm not. You can't make this stuff up. So yes, Francis, and she was a Carmelite nun in close association with the Franciscans, but there were a lot of Jesuits. And that when we're going to see next week that the Jesuits got thrown out of Baja and the Franciscans put in. And that's where the Jesuits who got thrown out went, to Texas. Yeah.
Hey, John,
Yeah.
last night we went to the city council meeting and in Lafayette, and there was a Native American speaker, Karina. Karina Gould is her name. And she did a very nice presentation. She's been very active with a women's group and with several organizations. They have now been ceded the land at Spangers, the parking lot there, and they are going to try to basically build back a shell mound to honor that. It's amazing to see the amount of the size of the shell mound that was taken down. Yeah, in Emeryville, there was a huge shell mound with neat steam shovels, et cetera, et cetera. At any rate, of course, in Lafayette now, the city council starts with a land acknowledgement of honoring the land that the natives have been there 10,000 years or whatever they are. And, you know, this whole stuff about stand by for there's going to be a plaque and a bulletin board at the Lafayette Community Garden telling about the missions and actually the Native Americans that were living in that area. This, you know, basically the Spanish came by in the 1500s and they came up the coast. They never saw, but were able to get into the Golden Gate. And that so for 250 years, this was the Lafayette area. In fact, all this area was basically all managed by the Native Americans. And it wasn't until 1750 or something like that when Ayala is the first person that adventure that kind of sailed into the gate and came up the Carquinez, I think. But so there's a whole history board and plaque that's going to go and talk about some of the stuff that went on with the missions and how the Spanish treated the Native Americans. And of course, ultimately, when California became a statehood, you know, they had basically a bounty on you could take $1 for a scalp and $5 for a head kind of thing. I was the first governor of California. At any rate, in that plaque and bulletin board, it talks about this history. They've been working on it a long time. And last night at the city council meeting, they had quite a presentation by this Karina Gold. And she did I think it'll probably be somehow online that you can listen to. But she talked about all of the different things and projects that they've got going all the way. So that has to do with the renaming of streets in Lafayette and so there's plenty of stuff that's been going on. So stay tuned to that. Come out to the garden. They just have it's Sunday. They have the open house. So
yeah. And our own Connie Loosely from this neighborhood teaches third graders in the Miwok Village.
That's correct. And they do that. And there's also a woman, that's out of a Grinding Rock State Park. She also talks to I want to say, what is her name? Martha? No. Yeah. Stan. But she also does something related to that, not with Connie's and Peggy's group, but she comes down from Grinding Rock. And has anybody been to Grinding Rock State Park?
Where is it?
Yeah, that's on the way up to Sacramento, I believe.
Yeah, Jackson, I think. And we had a neighbor who is very much involved in looking back into the past, Dave, and he thinks that Grinding Rock should become a World Heritage Site.
Absolutely, yeah, no question about it.
Clinic.
So yeah, David Clinic, exactly.
Yeah, well, a fellow by the name of I've forgotten his last name, but Robert has done a lot of the research. What we hear about is the Ohlone, essentially, because that has a lot of the history on the other side of the hills, but this was a Bay Miwok area. where we are up on there's six villages, I think, around Mount Diablo, and so yeah, so stand by for this. The fellow, it's being made into a plaque, and it's going to, so you could be able to actually drive by and see it without going into the garden. But then inside the garden, there'll be a bulletin board talking about this history at this site. And then the natives, there was a big battle with the Spanish. Basically, the local people that were living at the mission said, "Well, we're out of here. This is we're just being enslaved," and so they went off and they actually defeated the Spanish in a couple places, and then ultimately, and then they learned how to build trenches, and so that the Spanish, and they're riding horses and that kind of stuff, they couldn't get through the trenches to get over. So, it was fascinating history.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, David Kleinek's a paleontologist. He said the first Spaniards to come through this area was Father Crespi, who is also a Mallorcan, and came over a little after Serra did, but they came in and into the Alhambra Valley and headed south down towards your way, towards Lafayette. They were coming out of Mission Dolores. So we'll get into that whole chapter at some point. But
Well,
David,
I'm not a proponent of Father Sierra, so anyway.
well, I don't know if anybody's a proponent. We'll see. But David Klinik comes here and looks into our little valley, Indian Valley. He's sure that there was a major Miwok civilization right here, and
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm in Walnut Creek, so
well, he'd love nothing better than to start digging. And he did pick up not exactly an arrowhead, but the shavings of an arrowhead. He's pretty sure.
Have you ever been to the East Bay Hill people? They take tours they've taken tours of all of the stone mortars, and there's all kinds of mortars, because that's the only thing that's left, of course, is because everything else was natural, and that all of the dwellings and have disappeared. And
yeah, just the pounding stones. Yeah. Well, we're really running over. I know some people gotta go. So, any other urgent comments before we?
Very interesting, John. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
the deal. Yeah.
See y'all. See, stop.